Yeah, exactly right. That is pretty much the story of my life. I was born. I have to tell you a little bit of my story, so you have context for why I do what I do. Okay. My dad was a Baptist minister, so I was raised in fundamental dispensationalist, independent Baptist, large Baptist church in Detroit. Come on in. Fill up the front row. But I was born in 1968, so now you know how old I am. And so I was basically born at the same time that the evangelical movement was born. So I was pretty much grew up as a young evangelical and followed the path of many of those young evangelicals. So I went to Wheaton College, and I've always had two passions in my life that have sometimes fought against each other and sometimes worked perfectly together. The first is I've always felt called to ministry, teaching, preaching, being a pastor, but I also have been an artist since ever I can remember. And I knew I was going to be an artist when I was in 4th grade. And so I've always wondered, I was like push and pull, like a donkey and an ox in the yoke together. It's like, how does this work? And so I went to Wheaton College, as all good young evangelical boys do. And I ended up graduating with an arts degree. I chucked my biblical studies minor and just went full on art, grew my hair long, wore it since go, did the whole deal. I got married right before my senior year of college, and what my summer job in college was I drew caricatures at the amusement park in Great America in Chicago. So I made fun of tourists for a living, drew caricatures 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was so much fun. The company I worked for was expanding, and they invited me to move to Las Vegas to open up the Excalibur Hotel. Whoa! So imagine this young, good boy, evangelical kid moving to Las Vegas. And it was a great adventure. So we did move there. I hired and trained caricature artists and airbrush t-shirt artists for 6 years. But my wife and I got involved in a church there called Central Christian Church, which was an up-and-coming Willow Creek style back in 1990. And got involved, and I was in Vegas for 17 years. So I went on staff at this church, which grew from 1,200 people to 8,000 people while I was there. We had a staff of 100 people, so mega church. And come on in. Yeah, there's spots over there. So at this church, look, get right there.
And sorry, Steve, this is a good time just to say hi to all the webinar folks.
Well, hey, webinar folks. Thanks for tuning in. And do we have any out there? Oh, good.
And ask them to open the chat.
Please open your chat, because Nick's going to be back there fielding questions. As soon as I'm done with my little story, we're going to jump in, and this is going to be a very interactive kind of workshop, I hope. So webinar, you can ask questions, live crowd can ask questions. But super quick, I got my MDiv at Bethel Seminary, and in 1994, Bethel Seminary was on the cutting edge of this thing that they used to call the information superhighway, and we did distance learning. So I crammed a 5-year program into 8, and got my MDiv in their in-ministry delivery program. And so, I mean, we were doing dial-up bulletin board chats at the beginning. And in 2002, when I finally finished the program, we had like full-on Web 2.0. So I actually evolved with the web as I was getting my MDiv, which is really cool. But I was also evolving theologically, like all good young evangelicals did, and I became very involved in the emerging church conversation. So in 2002, when I finished my MDiv, I was done with megachurch evangelicalism, and we started a house church. And for 5 years, we did organic house church kind of experimentation. And part of the reason I tell that story is because I got into this method of teaching, because there's no pulpit in a house church, right? No preaching. So what I did, we as a community, agreed that we were going to read through the Bible together in a whole year. And so what I would do is I would take I was always a week ahead of the community. And we ended up evolving into a network of house churches, so there's like a bunch of the people I never even saw. And so what I would do is I would cartoon the passage of scripture that we were studying. I would create this cartoon overview. And then I would write a daily devotional. I would put it into a PDF. This was before Web 2.0, but I put it into a PDF and I would email that out to everybody in the whole network. And then everybody would study Monday through Friday, do their Bible study and family interaction. And then we get together on Sundays and say, well, what did God teach us this week? Right? But I cartooned my way through. And so we did that for 5 years. So I have literally illustrated the entire Bible because of that house church experience. It was kind of fun. In cartoon. Right? So I was a cartoonist and an animator. And so that's where those two things came together. Now that church was really great for a while, and then it got really bad. And it ended poorly. It died a painful death, left me wounded and bleeding, and I vowed I'd never be a pastor again. God told me to move back to Minnesota, where my parents were, and to pursue a PhD, which I had no idea how to do. For 3 years, I was full-time illustrator animator. So I'm telling you this story because it explains why I do what I do, right? Because these two passions have always interwoven. My dad introduced me to a Lutheran pastor down the road who actually loved me back into ministry. I woke up from my ministry coma and found myself in the ELCA. Yeah, woo! And I finally found a theological space that I could breathe in. And so I transferred my ordination. I have now, since 2012, I've been a fully rostered ELCA pastor. And I did get a PhD in congregational mission and leadership. And my thesis advisor was Mary Hess, who those digital folks probably know her as a rock star.
Yes.
So you can tell why she wanted to work with me, because she totally geeked out over my digital and art stuff. So I actually animated and illustrated my way through my PhD dissertation. And I have 4 years worth of all of my research, my book reviews, illustrations called deepintheburbs.com. And Mary actually wanted me to be able to submit that website as my dissertation. The institution did not look highly upon that idea, so they made me write the book too. So I had lived this experience of living in this print world, having to write a book, but expressing myself in the digital media through animation, website design, all that kind of stuff. So that's who I am. Now, the purpose of this workshop is to show you, we're going to geek out over tools and toys of the trade. And I want to show you, first of all, I just want to show you what I do, because I've since taken a new call at Eastern Lutheran Church in Eagan, Minnesota. So I'm in the St. Paul Area Synod, South Metro. It's a large suburban congregation. And I preach, there's 4 pastors, 2 campuses, so we all preach half the time. And every time I preach, I cartoon illustrate the sermon. And people walk through the sermon with me visually. And that's what I'm here to show you how I do it. And now, my disclaimer at the beginning is, I realize I have a unique blend of being a cartoonist and a preacher. So I'm not here to show you how to be a cartoonist preacher, okay? I'm just going to show you the tools that I use, and then as soon as I start showing you this, any questions you have, feel free to shout them out, okay? Because I'm just going to show you a couple examples of the PowerPoints that I use. I'm going to show you 2 PowerPoints of actual sermons that I've preached, and I'm going to show you 2 Prezis of how I've used Prezi, one to create. It's actually my dissertation defense. I use Prezi as my presentation. But I also use Prezi, I created an interactive online bibliography. And I'll show you how I've used that on our website, okay?
What's your name again?
Steve Thomason. Oh, it was up there.
There we
My iPad went dormant on me. So, first of all, everything that I'm going to do today, I'm doing on an iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil. And if you've never seen an Apple Pencil like this, it's because it has a fancy rubber grip skin on it that is an aftermarket that I bought and clip. Okay, so they come out of the package as just this slick white piece of plastic. All right, would you like to see an example of a PowerPoint? So yeah. Okay. So we're going to go to PowerPoint. Now again, everything here is on the iPad Pro. All right, so one of the things that I love, when I first started using iPads, Microsoft products were trash. They were terrible. But Microsoft woke up and smelled the Apple world, and the Microsoft suite actually works really, really well. Yes, sir.
Can you start your screen share?
Did it stop?
I think when it went to sleep. That.
2, 1. Bing. Is that working?
Yep.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Nick. Can you see it now?
go.
Okay, so this is going to be a behind the scenes kind of, by the way, my favorite when I buy a DVD or Blu-ray, a movie, my favorite is the making of, behind the scenes stuff, where you see all the deep stuff in the background. So that's what this workshop is going to be. So this is what Microsoft PowerPoint looks like on an iPad. And it's really robust. I've created full presentations just on my iPad. So this is an actual PowerPoint that I used at my last church for a sermon. The text was the Good Samaritan, not Good Samaritan, Zacchaeus story. We were preaching through the narrative lectionary. So I gave context for the story by giving like the big picture, Luke 18, and then Luke just kind of setting it. I'm not going to preach the story. This is just to show you the visuals, okay? But then I go into full color. And my idea for this is that I believe we live in a visual society, right? And I'm storyboarding the sermon so that people can walk through me conceptually, picture by picture, as I frame the story. This is really helpful, especially for narratives. But actually, I'll show you how I do the same thing with non-narrative texts as well. Okay. So here's Zacchaeus, where we have my little interpretation: danger, rich tax collector, which is what we assume when we. So what I'm doing in this sermon is I'm actually making a proposition that Zacchaeus is actually the good guy in the story and not the evil tax collector. So I'm setting us up for what we expect him to be. And then Jesus says, I must stay at your house. And we're like, why shouldn't we stay at his house? And when all the townspeople are like, well, he's a sinner, blah, blah, blah. So here, I throw in, I'm going to show you how I do this. These are little screenshots from my Bible software that I pull in and show and contrasting two versions. So you have the NRSV on the left, ESV. And this is interesting enough to stop and teach this point. If you compare the translations of the Zacchaeus story, in the NRSV, it says, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, which makes it sound like he's going to do it in the future, like changing his ways because he's been a bad guy. But the ESV is more accurate translation. It says, behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. Like, this is my practice. This is what I do. But nobody sees it because they assume I'm a bad guy. Isn't that fascinating? So I give to the poor and I seek justice. And Jesus, like, salvation's come to this house already. Because he's living the kingdom. He's doing the work, right? And he says, this is a son of Abraham. He always has been. And then for For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost. This is just a snippet, a little screenshot from my Bible software, but I'll show you how I do that. So then I go back to the big narrative arc where Luke 10, which is the sending of the 12, which was actually quoted yesterday as the missional text, right? Was that Alex that quoted that? That let's dwell in the, this is, I did missional theology, right? So this is like the missional text. He says, the kingdom of God has come near. And so you have the whole travel narrative. The travel narrative ends with the story of Zacchaeus, where Jesus says, I must dwell in this house. And that's how it kind of pulls together. So anyway, that's, and then I give people 3 challenges for how to live into kingdom vision. Let's pray and go home. Okay, so that's the first story. That's one example of a visual sermon, right? Now, here's one I did just this last Advent. We preached through the Advent, we stole the Advent conspiracy theme and did our own version of Advent conspiracy. And so I want you to look at this. This is an example of taking, this is the text of 1 John 3:16-18, which is an epistle, not a narrative, but still doing a storyboard step-by-step. Okay, so this is the big picture. I didn't actually show that to them at the beginning. That's like my cover page for this. This right here is an is an example. One of the practices that we do at Easter is we publish this thing called a Grow Guide. Every week, we put together a resource that has small group questions, family questions, connections to generosity, for people to go deeper into the text for worship that week. But every week, I draw a picture, and it gets printed in this. It's printed, handed out. It's on our app. We have an app for the Eastern Lutheran Church app. So we engage people visually each week. So this was the picture from the week before, to just remind them of the review. This was another one that, this is just examples of the kind of illustrations I do each week for our congregation. Then I went into the text. So what I want to show you here is that I've taken the text. This is the actual words of the text, okay? But put into kind of a mind mapping visual way, kind of how I did all of yesterday, right? And so I'd say, we know love by this. And then I ask your congregation, how do you know that you're loved? Kind of tapped into the 5 love languages, right? And then he says that he laid down his life for us. And then I jumped back to the kenosis text, because how do we know that he emptied himself? This is what Jesus said. And we ought to lay down our lives for one another. And then I went into this idea that I call the overflow principle, that as God pours into us, it overflows into everyone else. And then this was Advent conspiracy. So I had this picture of a family, and we think what this is all about is just us, right? So the text goes on, how does God's love abide in anyone who has, and then I stopped and asked everybody to say with me, the world's goods, and sees a brother or sister in need, and yet refuses to help. And then I go back to the verses right before this, and John gets really intense and says, a brother or sister who hates, anyone who hates his brother or sister is a murderer, right? People are a little shocked at that point. And the big question for the sermon is, how can we expand our circles and spill over them to others? And then the text concludes, little children, let us love not in word or speech, blah, 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 because talk is cheap, but in truth and action. And then very subtly put the Greek in. And then end with, preach always and when necessary, use words. Okay, so that was my Advent sermon. You guys with me? Okay. So that's an example of PowerPoint and sermons. Now I want to show you a Prezi. How many of you have used Prezi or know of Prezi? Okay. Prezi is like PowerPoint on steroids. Prezi is, the big thing about Prezi is that it allows for zooming in and out and making people a little bit seasick while they're watching your presentation. Let me show you. So this was the actual presentation I used when I defended my dissertation. You go in and say, this is who I am. Then you go to the next one, and it says, this is my question. How might an increased awareness and understanding of the social trinity impact spiritual formation and ideation and practice, the ideation and practice of spiritual formation in suburban ELCA congregations? Very academic question, right? So I have to explain the question. I'm trying to take abstract theological constructs and connect them to lived experience because this is my argument about theology, so on and so forth. You can get the understanding, right? This is how Prezi works. So this was the framing. And the cool thing about Prezi is that you don't have to follow a linear path. What I'm doing is pinching and zooming in here. So if I wanted, like later on, if I wanted to use this presentation, but I wanted to tell you more about the social trinity, I could just zoom in here, and then it'll pick up on the linear path that I'm at. Are you seasick yet? Right? So Prezi is really a cool way, especially if you're in a classroom situation, and move around in it.
How do you spell Prezi?
P-R-E-Z-I. Yeah, Prezi.com, and they have different levels of membership subscriptions. Fortunately, I have an educator's license, which is cheaper. Now I'm going to show you one more thing, and then we're going to get into the how-to stuff, okay? I stumbled across this while I was doing my research, and you know, one of the things about PhD is you have to read a boatload of books, and then you're held accountable to them. So I was like, so I'm a visual thinker. I'm like, how in the world am I going to keep all of these books in my head when I have to sit down and do my comprehensive exams? So I created these maps. So this particular presentation actually started off like this. Here's another geek thing. I used Scrivener to write my dissertation. And Scrivener has this really cool feature where you can take all of your different documents and put them on a corkboard. And then I took the front cover of each book. I went and just online and found the front cover JPEG of each book. And I created a note card for every book that I was reviewing, right? So here's Stanley Grant's Rediscovering the Triune God. So this is my bibliography on the Trinity. And so, like over here, this is how most people think of a bibliography. Boring, right? I cannot remember this because it's just text on a page. So I had to create it graphically. So what I did was I did each one of these, and each one of these little cards in Prezi, I made a stop along the Prezi way. But notice, this is my illustration of this book. I did this just for me. So, and I did this all throughout. So I have illustrated almost every book I read for my doctoral study. And so, you know, you can go in and look at all of these different parts. This maps out, this book tries to map out the 20th century conversation around Trinity, okay? So on and so forth. All of these different books, you can see within each one of them, like this is Azulis' book on communion and otherness. And so here's my little drawing of this book. Now, if you zoom out, the social trinity is the center of my whole theological frame, right? So even after my dissertation, my comps were done, I just kept building on this. And so another way, my actual research project was to introduce social trinity to a group of typical suburban congregations. So I created a 4-part animated series. And that was how I presented Trinity to my research team. And so there's no sound on this, but It's actually playing on my screen. But this is a YouTube embedded in the Prezi, right? So there's all of these YouTubes embedded in there. Here's like an illustration. So what I try to do is anytime I have an idea, I draw it, right? One more thing that I wanted to point out. Inside of Prezi, at the bottom of each of these books, I created an actual hyperlink. So you touch that hyperlink, and it takes you to my research site where you can actually read the review of the book. Not my review of the book. Okay, so Prezi becomes truly interactive, where you can create linkable content, you can embed YouTube videos in it. And so this Prezi lives on both of my websites. So now anybody who's studying Trinity can go to this Prezi, and it also lives on the Prezi website. So anybody who's studying Social Trinity can find this Prezi and use it as, so basically what I'm doing is curating, right? And creating linkable, but I'm also a content creator. So I'm putting my content on there and linking it out to other places. All right, you've seen 2 PowerPoints, you've seen 2 Prezis, sermons, presentations, and interactive bibliographies. Now, I want to stop at this point, and I want to know, what do you want to know about how I do this? Rather than me just blah, 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 blah.
What drawing tools are you using?
Great question. Okay, there's 2 tools. The first one, and this is actually one of the first steps. So you see this red square with a pen in it? That's an app called Note Shelf. It's all one word, Note Shelf. And you can see, I was just taking notes in John Roberto's workshop last session. All of the notes that I took yesterday, the first 4 sessions were all done in Note Shelf.
No, what do you say, note?
Yep.
Shelf, right?
Yep, I'll spell it for you. Let me make a bigger pen. So let me show you how this works. Note Shelf comes with ballpoint pens, calligraphy pens, pencils, and highlighters.
Is that an app if you have an iPad?
It's an app, yep, and it costs like $7, which is amazing.
So what if you don't use, what's comparable for you using,
If you're not using Apple, use Apple.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I really don't know. I don't know the other tablets. My first tablet was iPad 2, and I've gone to the Retina, and now I'm on the Pro, and it's just amazing. With the Pro and the pencil, just a little geek moment on the illustration side. So I switched my studio to purely digital in 2002, and I was on PC actually at that point in my life. And of course, I have all the Adobe products, Photoshop and Illustrator and all that. But I also have Corel Painter. And using Corel Painter with a Wacom tablet, stylus, I can emulate all traditional media on the computer. With the iPad Pro and this pencil, it's about 95% as good as that. Blowing my mind. The next app I'm going to show you will show you how amazing it is. Okay, so I told you I was going to spell this out for you, but I'm making my pen bigger so you can read it better. So it's all one word. Note Shelf. Now what's really cool about Note Shelf is you couldn't see this. Oh, you still can't see it. Oh, yes, you can. Yeah, you can see it. See, it has this little zoom window in it. so that you can actually get really, really, really small. If you that's pretty cool. Since I'm in Note Shelf here, I'm just going to show you a couple things. A typical pattern that if you were watching me take the notes yesterday, you know, I'll just write a word. And this is where you don't have to be an artist, right? Anybody can write words, draw boxes and stuff. And I know people are like, yeah, it's easy for you to say. But I'll come over here and take this highlighter, and I'll make it maybe a number 5. And maybe I want this arrow to be green. The thing about the highlighter is it's like a highlighter, it's transparent, right? And then I'll just take a gray, make a nice little drop shadow underneath, that kind of thing. And then you can take this little scissor, you can move it around, you can make it smaller, repaste it, okay? Then when you're done with your illustration, for example, let me just show you. I have a few. So this is the one that I used in the 1 John sermon, right? Done right on this app. All one drawing, okay? But when you're done with it, what you do is you hit the select button, you choose the page that you want to select, and then you export it. And from this point, you see you can, okay, so the reason I'm here is because of Lisa Kimball. So Lisa Kimball lived this experience, right? I was at the REA, Religious Educators Association conference 2 years ago, 2016. I'm sitting in the plenary session. I don't know anybody in this room, by the way. I'm sitting in this room doing my thing, taking my notes, plenary session, because it's just what I do. She's sitting next to me. Has no idea who I am. I have no idea who she is. We get done, and she leans over. Can you email that to me? And I said, sure. So I pulled this up, hit the email button, and said, what's your email address? Tick, 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 tick. And now I'm here. So, but when you export it, you can save it to, like I use Dropbox, that's my magic button. So Dropbox connects my iPad, my iMac, my iPhone, everything. So I have like one storage place through Dropbox. Evernote is my other golden package, I use Evernote. But you can save it to your photo album right on the iPad. So you'll see I'll go down to my photo album. That's my family, by the way. And if I go down to the bottom of my photo album, this image is there. And what I'll do, you notice I've got that, well, it's not there yet. Is it just lag time?
It's Wi-Fi.
Okay.
So it can save as a JPEG or EPS or, so it could save as a high resolution?
It is high resolution.
Okay.
Yeah. The resolution of the iPad Pro is like 2048. Anything you do on here is high resolution. But then just right in your photo app, what I'll do, see how we have this left data right here? You don't really want that. So I will crop it out and then hit done, and it just trims up the image a little bit, right? The question you asked was, what are my drawing apps? Yes?
Oh, you can answer that first.
Oh, now the Note Shelf is a note-taking app. It's designed for people who like to take notes fast and furious, pens, pencils, that kind of stuff. It's not a drawing app. Because you can actually do audio recording in Note Shelf, you can import photographs, it's just really a cool app. But my illustration app is procreate. You can see it written there. Procreate, one word. I could geek out on this app for days because it's basically every brush you've ever imagined digitally. And it's like Photoshop on your iPad, okay? So up here you have a brush, you've got a whole slew of brushes. You've got sketching brushes, inking pens, calligraphy, painting, artistic brushes, airbrushing, right? You've got all of these things. And like here's just the basic pencil, but notice when I tilt my pencil, so it just behaves like a pencil. It's phenomenal. And then you can add layers to it, okay? So those are the two apps that I'm using to create the images. Trish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is just sort of step back from drawing for a second. For those of us that don't draw, I think we use images.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what makes you a wizard is that you think of an image and then you make it.
Right.
The rest of us Google image that image.
Yep.
Um,
Which I do as well, by the way.
Right. So my question is more, when you're thinking about a sermon, or most of us do presentations that are meant to be persuasive on some point.
Yep.
And what we learned in the brain workshop last night, and maybe you've heard before, is that the idea of putting text up in your PowerPoints and then either reading or referencing or pointing to it, that's just not the way to go. And more now, I've seen convincing presentations where there are just images that are going along with, but they're sort of like midwife images, not of midwife, but the image,
Yes.
Sort of gets a person to where you're trying to get them to go with your words.
Yes.
That they couldn't go without that image, or not go as quickly.
Yeah. A picture paints 1,000 words.
Exactly. Right? So do you have any, besides prayer, any advice on helping those of us who aren't going to draw, who are going to search Creative Commons and for pictures? What is your process for deciding what the image is? I mean, do you think about color? Do you think about, in what, advice for something should be abstract? It should be sort of lights and horizon-ish colors, as opposed to I just came from a presentation now, and at one point they put up on the screen a huge bloodhound sniffing, and it didn't really work for me. I think that they were talking about finding things. So I guess the idea was, instead of writing a slide that said listen for things, they put a big bloodhound up sniffing grass. So I get it. I mean, I was supposed to see that as an image of searching, but it didn't go ahead of what they were saying. It was just actually an illustration of the sentence to search. So I'm just curious to hear when you think about an image, is it meant to come alongside you like that and become the image of the thing that's said? Can images get ahead of what we're saying, or is that then people not going to go with you? Is that more of a high-risk image strategy?
That's an excellent question. And I think I'm kind of handicapped in the sense that I don't have to think about that. Honestly,
It's organic.
It's an organic process for me. But for example, there are times, I'll just use the example that I used about the Advent sermon. There was one photograph of a family at Christmas, right? As I was thinking through the sermon, I had already drawn out the map of the text. Like for me, it's not as much finding cute pictures as it is helping people move through the idea of the text one step at a time.
So the picture slows it down into steps.
Yeah, let me just go back to it. So the PowerPoint of that particular, this one right here, this is my, this is the whole, there it is. So this is the whole text, right? This is the actual passage in words, right? But what I'm trying to do for people is to slow them down and look at each phrase. This is my Baptist preaching coming out, right? Expository, verse by verse, it's just so ingrained into me that the words really matter. And so I wanted to stop and say, we know love by this. So I think rather than finding a cute image of a dog sniffing, put the words up there in an interesting way, which is what I'm doing. This is not a drawing. I mean, it is, everything's a drawing, but this is a hand-created text. So what I'm saying is, we know love by this, and then there's an arrow that's kind of anticipating, where's he gonna go with this, right? But all we're doing is reading it very, very slowly, so that when I go to the next one, oh, this is how we know love. That he, cross behind it, clue, laid down his life for us. So you're just highlighting the words. I think anybody can do that, right? Rather than having some Renaissance painting of the crucifixion, right? Does that help at all in your question?
Definitely.
Okay. And then, and in this example, I would periodically stop and go to a different idea about, here's love languages. So I found the cover of the book, because I'm actually referencing a book. So here's the book, right? But then when I got to this moment, where I was leading people was that the love of God actually spills into our uncomfortable spheres. But we think of love as my comfortable sphere. So I put up a picture of what we naturally think of as a Christmas moment. It's Christmas because it's an Advent sermon. But just here's this little family facing each other. So that communicates my idea. But then you move on. And like this is an example of like the world's goods. In this picture, I'm thinking, again, like I can just draw it, right? But I'm thinking, how do I show my viewer somebody hoarding all the world's goods while somebody needs something? So I put a big bag of money with the words right on it, the world's goods. So you could go, like, conceive of this image, go find a picture of a big bag of money, and then find a person begging or whatever. And then in PowerPoint, put the words, the world's goods on the back. You could construct those kinds of images. Is that helpful?
Yeah. And what would be, for the apps that you have, let's say you could probably find an image similar to on the internet, a big bag of money that has a clear field of the bag. So would you, to write into it, what app would you suggest that does Note Shelf do that and let you drag in and then write with your stylus right into it, and then you have that image that you could then put into PowerPoint? Is that the app you use to add text to pictures you got off the internet?
You definitely could.
Okay.
Note Shelf actually has a text feature where you don't even have to handwrite it. You can just type in text and resize it and change fonts.
Right onto an image you brought in from the internet.
Yep, you can do that. However, there is a brand new, what's brand new to me, Adobe has a new app out. I told Jen this yesterday. It's called Spark. Adobe Spark Post.
Better than Canva.
Really?
Yeah.
And you can do all of that intuitively, drag in a picture, put text on it, change the color, reformat it to fit Facebook ads, Twitter posts, Instagram size, Spark, Adobe Spark. And I've been using that lately. Like just last week, I read Richard Rohr's meditation every day, and there's this one passage that really caught me, so I copied it, brought it into Adobe Spark Post, and within less than 5 minutes, created a really beautiful meme, posted it on Facebook. And Spark Post will link to free photographs So I just found, I mean, here's back to your question, Trish, is like, okay, what's an image that would evoke the emotion of this text? Put it in the background. There's a question.
Is that so that Adobe Spark post is linked to, I mean, is it designed specifically for social media posts then?
It is designed for social media posts, but you can save it as an image. And then you can bring it into your PowerPoint. Yeah, thanks for linking that back to what we're talking about. Yep, absolutely. So what I'm saying is that, I mean, this is hot off the presses. Like 2 weeks ago, I discovered this. What I'm saying is that Adobe Spark Post, and they have Spark Video and different things. And they have free applications of it. Could be a graphic design program for the non-graphic designer. And you can make beautiful images quickly that you could come and bring in here. So saying that, I do want to give you a tool that you can take home with you. There's 2 posts on my website, okay? And I have them here in my Evernote. The first one's called How to Create a Visual Sermon Using Procreate and Photoshop. And this post goes through, here's the process. Not up there yet. But it goes through step number 1, step number 2. So this would be your homework. You know, go home and read these. Actually made a video on YouTube about how to do this step by step. I've had a couple of tutorial videos on YouTube. But how to create a visual sermon. Step 1, I studied the text in Logos Bible software. And then I screenshot it out of Bible software and then use it as a visual. And then I think in pictures. It says, I think in pictures, seriously, I have to visually map out the text. So then I visually map out the text in whichever way you can do that. Then I export the page as a JPEG, which I already told you about. Then you open the Procreate app on the iPad, and you bring the photo into Procreate. Sorry about the technology. It's like 10 seconds behind where I'm at. But the link there is if you just go to my website and type in how to create a visual sermon, you'll find this post. The other post is how to use Word and PowerPoint to craft a visually oriented sermon manuscript. And let me show you what that looks like. So here's an example of an actual manuscript that I would take. I don't preach from a pulpit, but I carry my Bible and have my notes in my Bible. So this is the PDF that I would print out and put in my Bible. In PowerPoint, you can create the notes page, and you change your note master so your picture is small. And then you actually put a portion of the text of your sermon or the PowerPoint. I mean, we all know that, right? The PowerPoint. But notice how little text there is for each picture. Right? So this was a sermon on why we should pray. And so the question on the picture is why pray? And then I talk about the question, right? And then this is the next slide. But within PowerPoint, I'm visually highlighting my text for me because I try as much as possible to not, I don't even write my manuscripts anymore. Honestly, I storyboard them. I've been in the text so much, I just get up and preach. And I have my own clicker, and we have a prompter on the back, so I can see the slides. So I'm just talking to the congregation as we're walking through the pictures. But like one of my mentor preachers said, you need to go to the pulpit with a manuscript for 10 years before you ever go notes. I've been preaching for 25, so I don't use my manuscripts anymore. But I work them out visually. So it's kind of like the difference between literal and dynamic translation of the Bible. I go thought by thought through my search. Okay. Other questions? Yeah, I feel like I've been really scattered, but hopefully, yes.
Your images that you use, like that money bag, and then you have two characters.
Mm-hmm.
Did you create that in Note or did you?
I created that one in Note.
So you can draw limited drawing in there.
You can draw.
I
Yeah.
watched you draw yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, you can totally draw, but it's like drawing with a ballpoint pen.
Yeah. The other question, part two of my question is, in your John sermon, you had like, Jesus and stuff. Do you archive your characters? Do you keep using them, or do you create them each sermon?
I usually create them new every time. If there's a series, like we're in the narrative lectionary, so we're starting through John. I might reuse that Jesus character, or at least the head.
Yeah.
Then the body will be in a different pose.
So you had created your text visually, but then when you did your PowerPoint, you used some individual. Did you save it as a full text and then afterwards cut that for the little parts of each thing?
Fabulous question. Here's the how-to. So I'm going to take yesterday's notes from the MBE, right, and show you how I do this. So one of the things about, that's not even the file I'm on, hold on. Okay, so one of the things that's so cool about Procreate is it has, Nick, is there any way you can move the pop-up to a different part of the screen? Because it's
Just drag
covering
it down.
over my layers.
Just
Well,
drag
it's
it
not
down.
on my,
It's on his, is it on his or yours?
It's not on mine. Oh, so
Yeah.
you can kind of see it. You see what's happening right here? That there's layers in Procreate. And if you know anything about Photoshop, you can make those layers interact with each other. So I'm here on layer 1. And what I'm going to do is right up here, there is a selection tool. And if I wanted to begin this process, I would select this first box like this. And then down here at the bottom, there is a little icon that has 2 lines on it. And what it does is it copies and pastes into a new layer. So if I turn off the first layer, you can see that I just have that section. And that's actually how I take my big mind maps and turn them into step-by-step
And
process.
it's that way it keeps the resolution.
Keeps the resolution tight. And then what I do is once I get it all cut up into layers, there's 2 things you can do. If you want to stay totally iPad, you can actually, like from this moment, I'll show you how it works. You come up here to this wrench, you do share as JPEG, and then it gives you multiple options. You can save it anywhere you want. I'll just save it right to my save image. That goes right to my photos, right? And you'll see when I go to photos, there's my first image. We're still on the export part of Procreate. So watch carefully. So I'm sharing. This is like the replay. You actually didn't get to see it.
Well, we saw it.
No, we did, actually, it did happen.
It did.
Oh, it did happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
It did well.
So now I have a JPEG that's just that part. And I would have gone in and cleaned up these little, because I get angry about that, right?
Yeah.
Those little artifacts. But you copy and paste, so you never destroy your original.
Yeah.
And then when you go and oh, we have till noon, don't we? I was thinking that I only had 5 minutes left. That's why I'm getting a little panicked. Okay. So let me just take it into 2 levels, right? So we've got, that's my first chunk. Now I'll turn that chunk off, that layer off, and I'll turn on my master image again. And let's say this time I just want to go all the way down to the rockstar image. What I'll do is a little trick that I learned is just go ahead and select what you already selected before, but then go and expand it. So now we're going to have the first and the second part. Boom. So that keeps the registration clear, right? But another reason to do this is that sometimes I'll want to put like a little drop shadow underneath this part. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. I want to put a little drop shadow to make my brush bigger. Put a little drop shadow under this part when I have it up the first time. So I'll export that section. But then when I come back to this one, the shadow's gone. Right? So every time you cut a part and make it a separate layer, you can tweak it. You know? So by the time you're done carving up your big picture, and by the way, you could do this with photographs. Right? Like, how cool would it be to have a campus map? And then we could do this with the seminary, right? Take a campus map, cut each building out, and then do this layer by layer PowerPoint. And this is how you do it. You just take the one image, you carve it up, make it into a new layer. Never damage your original, because you might need to go back and make a change, right? But then you have these layers of each section, because you thought through it like a storyboard. And then you export each image as a separate JPEG. And then when you come into PowerPoint, you just drag those images into a new slide. And you have this step-by-step presentation. Okay, more questions? I'm going, did somebody have one? Because I do have a little step-by-step how I do it kind of presentation. Maybe I should walk you through that. This presentation is called My Workflow for Visual Sermons, which I created using this method, okay? As a simple, and I tried to make this one purposefully super simple, with no drawing skill or minimal drawing skills required, okay? So the first thing I do is actually go to my Bible software. Again, this is for creating a sermon. So you got to start with the text. You got to actually do the research and the study and the prayer and the hard work of writing a sermon. Step one, right? Newsflash. However, I do want to show you Logos Bible because it's phenomenal. There's lots of Bible software. Remember, I came from an evangelical world. I started with Logos back in '94 when it was on 3.5-inch floppy disk, Windows 3.1. Logos kind of represents more of that Reformed tradition. So a lot of the stuff that will come out of Logos you might not really like much. But the Bible's still the Bible, and it's a powerful research tool for original texts and all that kind of stuff.
I do have it, and it does have a lot of resources for the Anglican tradition and packages for the Anglican tradition as
Yes,
well.
it has an Anglican package, a Lutheran package, a Roman Catholic package. So they really have tried to be as ecumenical as they can. So yes, thank you for that. It's a great software. They just updated it, so it has Windows. But like, for example, in this software, I just went through and made a note. Oh, are you kidding me? I made a note that has a link for all the narrative lectionary texts. So I can just keep my running notes as I'm building this sermon series, okay? So, for example, here, I'm just randomly in John 4 here. If I'm studying the text and I really like it, I will screenshot it. And then in the screenshot, this is a new thing for the newest iOS. Screenshot will bring up an editor right away. So you can kind of crop it in to what you like. So you don't even have to take it into your editing software if you don't want to. And then you just hit done, save the photos, and now you have the text letter edition, and you didn't have to type it out or copy it, you know, it's kind of cool.
Is, when you're doing that and you're saving it, is it saving it as, what's is it saving it with a keyword, or is it saving it with just an image number, or what?
It just saves it with generic image number into photos. And then, like,
So
I've
you
gone
gotta
in.
go back, so you've got some.
I've gone into my photos and created albums,
Uh-huh.
so I can keep my photos organized. That's a great question. So that was step 2. Clip the text using screenshot. Step 3, bring the screenshot into Note Shelf. And an example of that is that in Note Shelf, now this is going to be a big test to see if the flip will work on our screen share. Boom! So this is a screenshotted text from Logos that I then brought into Note Shelf and marked it up. And this is just me doing my study visually, like you would have done in a paper study Bible, right? But it's just particularly for this text, right? Does that make sense? And I will probably not use any of that in the final presentation. That's just my study. You brainstorm, it's a doodle pad, it's just, see, because what I'm doing is I'm studying the text. I mean, it's just exegesis work. I'm trying to find those patterns, those related things, those repeated things, just good hermeneutics, right?
So I have a question about Note Shelf and when you're exporting it. So does it, when you're doing like your search, like the thing I love about like, you know, just notes in my iOS is that I write a whole bunch of crap. Like, I mean, I'm just like free streaming whatever, and then I can go back and like look, like search. Is there any way in which it is smart enough to figure out your words that you've written or that you've imported that will like help you keep your crap together?
If you use Evernote. Here is where wizardry goes beyond blowing your mind. Okay? Evernote,
Right.
you can link Note Shelf to Evernote automatically.
Really?
It will update your notebook without, you know, just automatically does it. And Evernote, if you have that premium account, will take all of your images, photographs, and OCR them.
Nice.
In your handwriting,
Nice.
if you write well.
Could it be your handwriting? Can I automatically?
Yeah, right. But like if I were to go in right now to Evernote and search Trinity, it will find my drawings that have the word Trinity written in them from Note Shelf.
So is Evernote a Apple?
No, it's
No.
cross-platform.
Oh,
I did my entire PhD research using Evernote. I'd go into the library with my phone, and I was on an Android back then. Open up Evernote, click, click. I'd sit there and just like snap 14, 20 pages from a book, put it back on the shelf with Evernote. And then I go back and highlight it later, and it's fantastic. And the scanning software in Evernote, it does document scan.
And then the newest Evernote, its PDF annotation is amazing.
It is amazing.
It's really, I mean, so a lot of this, you can do, a lot of the things that you're looking at in Note Shelf, you can do.
For example, we just did a Post-it note exercise at our opening session. So in Evernote, using my phone, I went to, I just want to go to All Notes. I took a little picture of my Post-it note, but Evernote has built into it to recognize Post-it notes. So it formats it, keeps the color vibrant, and makes it look like a Post-it note. It even has the Post-it note logo at the bottom. Isn't that crazy? Evernote is amazing. And you can get a free. I was putting so much into it, though, when I was researching that I had to buy the package. It's like 1 terabyte of storage, though. You pay $5.
$100.
Sure.
Sorry for being a little dark. Can you speak to if you've used some of these like techniques, that's not so writing. It's beyond just writing and reading based with helping people learn that perhaps have a reading disability, or speak to like some connection between like teaching and how this could work well for people of varied abilities, I guess.
I can't speak to that authoritatively.
Okay.
I can only guess.
Mhm.
Like, I teach confirmation. Middle schoolers love it
Right.
because they're like, I get it, because they see it,
Mhm.
right? It's not text-based. That's as much as I can say with any kind of insight.
Yeah.
Patricia, I don't know if this is what you were getting at earlier, but it made me think about this. I, in doing so many presentations over the years, there have been these people that expect is hear Cal, see Cal kind of image, right? It's didactic. It's just there, like you said, you mentioned a picture earlier, like that you could just throw in. But what I think you were talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, is what is going to take them to it? What's going to, what is going to inspire that faith moment in them to take them to that place? Is that what you were
Yeah,
asking?
exactly, yeah, because what I learned from the brain stuff we did last night is the brain can only do one thing at a time. So I went home a little nervous thinking, why do I talk and have presentations at all? Visual presentations. Because the brain can do one thing at a time. Why would I distract what I'm saying? Or I should just not speak and have a series of images. So my question was more, what are the image choices you can make that recognize the brain does one thing at a time? And what I got out last night is there's a spiritual practice of creating some silence in your presentations so that you can speak, and that the image can then start speaking.
Mhm.
But this other question you're getting at, and you've been very helpful today, is it looks like you do it with arrows when you do it with text, but images could do the same. Is that the images are creating this actual narrative of your point. So it's not an argument about Zacchaeus. It's a story. So the image should collect everyone. Like the image should reflect the thing you're saying. It kind of check in, make sure we're all on the same bus before it starts to move. But then if it's the right image, it then moves. And maybe you don't even know where you're moving until the next image comes, and then you realize where this one was pointing. But that is very helpful seeing both in your writing I'm looking up right now. It looks like your arrow is a very powerful thing because it's linking the points you're making into a story.
Visually guiding you there.
Yeah, and having the steps that the images then are really collecting people at each point and putting them into the next frame.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to find the video that explains this, because we can't multitask, but that doesn't mean we can't intake two different types of information into the same task. And so there is the visual intake is separate from the word intake. But whether you're reading it or hearing it, so if you're reading on the screen a big block of text and someone is reading you that same big block of text, you are using one intake stream. If you are seeing an image that is illustrating what is being read to you, you are using two processing streams. And there's a great video that explains dual processing, and I'll try to find it real quick and tweet it out over put it out over the chat.
So that's not multitasking.
So that is not multitasking.
Right.
That is dual inputs into the same task, and that is completely separate research in neuroscience than multitasking. Numbers and letters, which is what we were illustrating last night, are two different tasks and two different cognitive domains.
Mm-hmm.
So that I hadn't heard that earlier, so thank you. That's
awesome.
The interesting thing is that we have generations now of people who have grown up with complex soundtracks, complex visual storyboards, moving, animating, doing it all together on now these various devices. So I like the research too that's speaking to how it may actually be changing,
I want to, yeah,
the whole brain function.
it's all
Yeah.
changing. I want to address something that Trish said though, that like we heard yesterday, there's a practice of creating silence. And Visio Divina has been around a long time.
Right.
Right? And I actually engage people. Sometimes I'll do a very full and complex illustration, and I'll just put it up there and say, I want you to soak in this picture for a full minute.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I'm preaching. But especially if I'm leading a class or a workshop, and say, tell me what you see in this image. And I've drawn the image, and they see things that I've never even thought of in the image. You know, that's just fascinating. So I think just engaging people, because images just speak in a different way.
I'm trying to find the exact question here. I'm just hoping you help me out here, Steve. But my reflection is, there was a time when I would say jokingly, but mean seriously, that I'm not an artist, I'm not creative, I can't do that stuff, wasn't born with it. And as I've gone in my short time as a preacher, I've found myself saying that less, and desiring to consume less and to create more. And I do that in lots of different ways. I mean, some of that looks like just going to Canva and taking some template stuff and changing it and trying to, but I guess I'm just curious. I know that it's you being you, right? But you can also observe other people being them and those kind of things. I'm curious, like, what is the process of creating for you? How do you think that changes your ability and your way, maybe your bandwidth, maybe your engagement with, but how does that enable something for you that you think the idea of maybe just consuming, maybe you're just Google searching and you can't draw. What does that enable that maybe we can aspire to as preachers or leaders with different creative skill sets right now?
I want to acknowledge two things. One is 1 minute to noon. Two, I still haven't heard the question clearly. So maybe we could talk over lunch or something, because I don't know if I understand what you're asking. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is noon, so I don't want to go over time. Those who are leadership in this, should we just close now? Are we good? Okay. Thank you for being at this workshop. I hope you learned something. It's fun. This is the whole deal, by the way. This is supposed to say right manuscript. I don't know why it does on my screen. This PowerPoint I will put on the website, and I'll send it to the repository of PowerPoint. Bon appetit.